You see, there is a silent force within the empaths that no one truly understands until it erupts like a storm breaking after years of quiet skies. When I speak of the empath, I am not merely speaking of a sensitive person who feels what others feel. I am speaking of an archetype, a living, breathing symbol of the psyche's deepest capacity for connection, pain, and transcendence. The empath is not simply a personality trait. It is a configuration of the soul, one that holds within it both light and shadow, both the sacred and the destructive. And when such an archetype reaches the point of being fed up, when it has been stretched and strained beyond its natural tolerance, something far more profound and dangerous is born. It is not danger in the crude sense of violence or revenge, but in the way that something once passive and receptive suddenly transforms into a force that refuses to be controlled by collective expectations. The empath begins life as a mirror. It reflects the unspoken emotional realities of those around it. It carries the psychic burdens of others without even realizing it, for this is its nature, an unconscious submission to the currents of collective feeling. It is a gift, but like all gifts from the unconscious, it is double-edged. The gift of feeling everything also means absorbing pain that is not yours, living within wounds that were never meant for you. Over time, the empath becomes like a vessel overflowing, and when that vessel cracks, what spills out is not simply anger, it is clarity. It is the moment the archetype awakens to itself, no longer willing to be a passive recipient of the collective shadow. There is something archetypal about the moment when the empath says, enough. It is akin to the myth of the sleeping goddess who suddenly rises, shaking off centuries of dust and chains. The empath, when fully awakened, is no longer a shadow of others' needs. They become an image of individuation itself, of the process of separating what is yours from what belongs to the world. This is why I say that a fed-up empath is one of the most dangerous archetypes, because their awakening threatens the entire web of unconscious projections that has kept them bound. The people who have depended on them for emotional labor, for care tolerance, suddenly encounter a force they never expected. They see someone who is no longer defined by suffering, but by a refusal to carry what is not theirs. To understand this transformation, we must delve into the shadow. Every empath has a shadow that often lies dormant for years, even decades. The shadow of the empath is not cruelty or aggression, as one might assume. It is the repressed self, the authentic voice that was silenced in order to please and absorb others. This shadow becomes dangerous when the empath has spent a lifetime ignoring it. It grows like a silent reservoir of suppressed truths. And when the dam breaks, it floods the landscape of their psyche with a raw, unfiltered authenticity. This is not the empath suddenly becoming bad or selfish. It is the archetype returning to wholeness. It is the psyche demanding balance. I have often observed in dreams the appearance of figures that represent this transition. A woman who has always been gentle may dream of herself as a lioness or a warrior, wielding fire. A man who has always been the peacemaker may dream of destruction, earthquakes, or storms. These are not omens of external violence, but inner symbols representations of the psychic energy that was suppressed for too long. The unconscious does not tolerate imbalance indefinitely. It will manifest its truths, even if it must erupt like a volcano. And so, when the empath awakens, they are not merely standing up for themselves. They are embodying a force of nature, one that has been denied its rightful expression. But there is something more subtle here. When I say that the fed-up empath is dangerous, I do not mean they will harm others. I mean they will no longer play the roles assigned by the collective unconscious. They will dismantle the illusions that kept them chained to the suffering of others. This dismantling is dangerous to those who rely on their silence. It is dangerous to the narcissist who has fed on their light. It is dangerous to the social systems that reward martyrdom but punish individuality. The empath who finally says no is, in truth, saying yes to their soul, to their true path of individuation. Have you ever felt that moment, that quiet but thunderous realization that you are no longer willing to carry the emotional weight of a world that refuses to heal itself? That moment is the birth of the archetypal warrior within the empath. It is as if the soft moonlight of their nature suddenly merges with the fierce power of the sun. They become whole. They integrate what was once projected onto others. They stop living as the unconscious healer for everyone else and begin to live as a conscious being, aware of their boundaries and power. What makes this transition so profound is that it is not merely psychological, it is spiritual. The empath, when fed up, is forced to confront not just the people around them, but the deeper archetypes that shaped their entire identity. They begin to ask, why do I feel responsible for everyone's suffering? Why do I equate love with sacrifice? These are questions that touch the roots of the psyche, reaching into the collective unconscious where myths and ancestral patterns dwell. Perhaps they were taught by the world that to be good is to be selfless, to the point of erasing oneself. Perhaps they carry the ancestral wound of those who were silenced, burned, or cast out for speaking their truth. When these patterns are recognized, the empath begins to see that their pain was never just personal, it was archetypal. I often imagine the fed-up empath as a figure standing at the threshold of a dark forest. Behind them is the familiar world, where they have played the role of healer, listener, caretaker. Ahead of them lies the unknown, the shadowy realm of their own needs, desire, and authentic self. Crossing that threshold requires courage. It is the hero's journey. But with a twist, the empath's dragon is not some external monster, but the internal fear of being seen as selfish, unkind, or unworthy. To slay this dragon is to claim the right to exist as a whole person, not just as a reflection of others' wounds. In our collective myths, the one who feels deeply is often portrayed as weak or passive, yet nothing could be further from the truth. True empathy is a form of strength that most people will never comprehend. But when that strength is abused, when the world takes without giving, the empath must transform or perish. I have seen too many souls lose themselves because they refused to draw boundaries. They collapsed under the weight of 1,000 unspoken sorrows that were never theirs to bear. And yet, when they awaken, they carry a wisdom that is unlike any other. They know, with a clarity born of suffering, what it means to survive the collective shadow. You might ask, why is this archetype dangerous now? Because we live in an age where people are hungry for authenticity, yet terrified of it. A fed-up empath does not play the games of polite society. They will not smile and nod when something is false. They have no patience for manipulation or coercion. They see through the masks people wear, and once you see, you cannot unsee. The world does not know how to deal with someone who refuses to participate in its illusions. This is why the empath, once awakened, is often feared, misunderstood, or even attacked. But this fear is not because the empath is harmful, it is because they are free. This freedom is born from suffering. There is no other way. To be an empath is to walk through fire, to feel the sting of betrayal, to cry over wounds that are not your own, but in that fire, something is forged. The soul becomes like tempered steel, unbreakable, unyielding. The empath who has reached the breaking point has also reached the point of creation. They are no longer content to be the silent absorber of pain. They become the creator of new boundaries, new truths, new ways of being. And this creation is what makes them powerful beyond measure. Imagine the empath as a figure who has spent their life kneeling, carrying others' burdens. When they stand, they do not stand as they once were. They rise with the accumulated wisdom of every wound, every tear, every moment of silent suffering. They become a mirror that no longer reflects what others project, but instead shines with its own light. This is dangerous to those who benefited from their silence. For the empath, now speaks with the voice of the self, the archetypal core of the psyche that seeks wholeness above all else. When the empath reaches this turning point, they are no longer defined by the expectations of others, but by the deeper rhythms of their own psyche. The transition is not sudden, though it might feel like an eruption. It is the result of countless subtle moments, years of quiet observation, years of swallowing unspoken pain. And then one day, the psyche says, no more. That no is not a rejection of love, but an affirmation of life. It is the soul reclaiming its sovereignty. It is the recognition that true compassion does not mean being consumed by the wounds of the world, but standing as a pillar of strength. Rooted in the self, capable of discerning what belongs to the collective and what belongs to the individual. The empath's journey is often hidden beneath layers of cultural conditioning. We live in societies that glorify the image of the ever-giving, self-sacrificing healer. This is especially true in families where emotional dynamics are imbalanced. The empath is often the one who learns from an early age to soothe the anger of the father, to absorb the sadness of the mother, to hold the broken pieces of everyone else. In this way, they develop an unconscious belief that their value comes not from their own being, but from what they give to others. This belief is a cage, and yet it is invisible because it is woven from love, duty, and fear. To break free of this cage, the empath must face the terrifying question, who am I if I am not defined by what I give in dreams? This transformation often appears as a confrontation with an archetypal figure, the mother, the father, the king, or the shadowy trickster The dream might show the empath standing in a burning house, refusing to save everyone, or standing on a bridge that collapses behind them, forcing them to walk forward alone. These symbols are not random, they are messages from the unconscious, urging the empath to individuate. Individuation is the central task of the human soul. The process of becoming who you truly are, rather than who the world demands you to be. For the empath, this means learning that love is not the same as self-erasure. When I speak of the empath being dangerous, I am referring to their capacity to disrupt the false order of things. A fed-up empath no longer tolerates manipulation. They will not stay silent when they see injustice. They refuse to participate in relationships that drain their life force. This refusal is threatening to those who rely on control because it exposes the fragility of the systems they have built. The empath, once awakened, becomes a truth teller, and truth tellers are always unsettling. They strip away the masks, they reveal the hidden dynamics, and in doing so, they force others to confront their own shadows. There is also a deep spiritual aspect to this awakening. The empath is by nature a bridge between worlds, the conscious and the unconscious, the personal and the collective. They sense what others cannot. They intuit the unspoken. They feel the tremors of the collective psyche. When they are fed up, they no longer use this gift to serve the egos of others, but to serve something higher, the unfolding of truth, the emergence of authentic being. In this sense, their danger is also their blessing. They embody the archetype of the wounded healer. But unlike before, they now understand that healing must begin with themselves. Consider for a moment the myth of Chiron, the wounded centaur who could heal everyone except himself. The empath's journey mirrors this myth. For years, they try to heal others, often at great personal cost. But when they reach the point of exhaustion, when they can no longer give, they are forced to turn inward. They realize that the wound they carry is not just their own, but a reflection of the collective wound of humanity. By tending to this wound, by learning to love themselves without conditions, they become something more than a healer. They become whole. And wholeness is a dangerous thing in a world that thrives on fragmentation. I have often said that the unconscious will do anything to be heard. For the empath, the unconscious often speaks through the body, through exhaustion, illness, or sudden emotional breakdowns. These are not signs of weakness, but messages, cries for attention from the parts of the psyche that have been neglected. When the empath finally listens to these messages, when they stop running from their own needs, a profound transformation occurs. They begin to live from the center of their being, rather than from the periphery. This shift is subtle yet radical. It changes not just how they see themselves, but how they move through the world. At this stage, the empath begins to see patterns they never noticed before. They recognize the cycles of giving and taking, of projection and expectation. They see how they have been cast into roles that were never theirs to play. Perhaps they were the family's peacekeeper, the friend who always listens, the partner who always forgives. These roles are masks, and while they may have served a purpose, they are not the truth of the soul. The empath who becomes fed up is the one who tears off these masks, who says, "This is not who I am, this is who you wanted me to be." Such an act is revolutionary because it reclaims the self from the collective unconscious. But this reclamation is not easy. It is painful to realize how much of one's life has been shaped by unconscious patterns. It is painful to confront the anger that has been buried beneath years of forced compassion. And yet, this pain is the path to freedom, for in facing it, the empath learns that they are not just a vessel for others' emotions, they are a sovereign soul with their own desires. Boundaries and power, this realization can feel like both a death and a rebirth. The old self dies, the self that was defined by martyrdom, and in its place, a new self emerges, radiant and unshakable. It is here, in this rebirth, that the empath's true danger lies, for they no longer play by the rules of the unconscious collective. They are no longer afraid of being disliked, misunderstood, or rejected. They have faced their own shadow and embraced it. And once you have embraced your shadow, no one can control you. The manipulations that once worked guilt, shame, fear no longer hold power. The empath becomes like the alchemist who has transmuted lead into gold. They have turned their suffering into wisdom. And this wisdom is a weapon that no one can take from them. I often liken this transformation to the mythic figure of the phoenix. The empath burns in the fire of their own awakening, but from the ashes they rise. This rising is not quiet or polite. It is fierce. It is unapologetic. It is the roar of a soul that has reclaimed its voice. This roar is what the world fears because it cannot be silenced. It speaks truth that cut through illusion. It challenges the structures of power that depend on silence. It is the voice of authenticity. And authenticity is always revolutionary. If you have ever reached that point of being fed up, the energy I speak of, it is not just anger, it is clarity. It is the realization that your empathy is a gift, but it is not a chain. You are not here to save everyone. You are not here to bleed for those who will not heal themselves. You are here to live fully and unapologetically as the person you were meant to be. When you realize this, your empathy becomes sharper, stronger. It no longer drains you because it is no longer entangled with the unconscious demands of others. It becomes a force of discernment, a weapon of truth. The fed-up empath is dangerous precisely because they are free. And freedom is the rarest thing in this world. Most people live in chains of their own, making chains of fear, of expectation, of collective conditioning. But when you break those chains, you become something the world cannot predict or control. You become a mirror that reflects the falseness of the world back to itself. You become, in a sense, an archetype of transformation, a living example of what it means to move from unconsciousness to consciousness. The fed-up empath carries within them an energy that feels ancient, as if it has been waiting through lifetimes for the moment to awaken. It is not born overnight. And it is not something the world teaches us to embrace. Most cultures celebrate the empath as long as they remain soft, pliable, and endlessly forgiving. But when that same empath begins to stand with their back straight, their voice firm, their eyes unclouded by illusion, something shifts in the collective dynamic. They are no longer an invisible servant of other people's wounds. They become a guardian of their own soul. And when someone who has always been defined by their willingness to carry others suddenly stops carrying, the world takes notice. Those who relied on the empath's silence feel exposed because they are forced to face the very shadows they projected onto them. This shift is not simply personal, it is archetypal. The empath begins to embody the archetype of the rebel healer, one who is not content to soothe the surface of wounds, but to demand that truth and light enter the places where no one wants to look. This is why the fed-up empaths feel so intense to others. They have merged with their own shadow. They have walked through the fire of their own suppression. And they have returned with something unshakable. Their empathy is no longer naive or easily exploited. It is precise, discerning, even surgical. They can feel when someone is hiding behind masks, when someone's words are filled with manipulation or dishonesty, and they will call it out, not necessarily with aggression, but with an unwavering clarity that cuts through falsehood like a blade. This is not to say that the fed-up empath becomes harsh or unkind. On the contrary, they become more compassionate than ever. But their compassion is no longer rooted in self-betrayal. They no longer bleed themselves dry to keep others comfortable. Their compassion is fierce, a form of truth-telling that can feel uncomfortable to those who prefer lies. They are willing to say what no one else dares say. Not out of cruelty, but because they have learned that real love cannot exist without authenticity. They are willing to lose people rather than lose themselves. There is an alchemy that occurs when the empath reaches this stage. They realize that much of their previous suffering came not from feeling too much, but from not knowing where they ended. And others began, they confused empathy with responsibility, believing it was their duty to fix everyone around them. But the awakened empath sees that this is an illusion. They understand that true healing can only happen when each soul takes ownership of its own wounds. The empath's role then is not to carry, but to witness, to guide, and to hold space without losing themselves in the process. This shift is what makes them powerful. It is the point where their empathy is no longer a weight, but a gift that shines without diminishing their own light. I have seen this transformation reflected in the symbolic language of dreams. A person who once dreamed of drowning in endless oceans begins to dream of walking on solid ground. A woman who once dreamed of endless bleeding suddenly dreams of fire-controlled, warm, illuminating. These symbols speak of integration, of the moment when the unconscious no longer dominates but aligns with consciousness. It is as if the psyche whispers, "You have given enough. Now it is time to claim your life." Such dreams are not just dreams, they are signposts from the deeper self, guiding the empath toward wholeness. The world often misunderstands this shift. It labels the fed-up empath as cold, selfish, or changed. And indeed, they have changed. They are no longer the same person who once accepted mistreatment, who once tolerated being drained. But this is not selfishness, it is self-respect. It is the understanding that you cannot pour from an empty vessel, that love without boundaries is not love but self-destruction. The empath learns that saying no can be the most loving act of all, both for themselves and for others. This realization is liberating, but it also carries a certain loneliness. For when you stop playing the role of the silent giver, not everyone will celebrate your freedom. Some will try to pull you back into the old patterns. Some will call you unkind because you refuse to bleed for them anymore. But this is the test of the archetype. Will you remain true to yourself even when the world resists? At this stage, the empath begins to embody a new kind of strength, one that is not loud or forceful, but grounded and unshakable. It is the strength of someone who has walked through their own shadows and emerged whole. They no longer fear the darkness because they know that the darkness is part of them. They have looked into the mirror of the unconscious and embraced what they found there, the anger, the grief, the unmet needs. And by doing so, they have freed themselves from the chains of repression. This inner freedom radiates outward, and people can feel it. It is the reason why a fed-up empath can walk into a room and change its energy without saying a word. Their presence alone speaks of boundaries, of clarity, of power, reclaimed. But this power is not about domination. The empath does not seek to control or conquer. Their power is rooted in authenticity. Authenticity has a way of reshaping everything it touches. It calls others to step into their own truth. It challenges them to face what they have been avoiding. This is why the empaths can feel dangerous to those who are not ready for truth. Their mere presence is like a mirror that reflects the falseness of others. And not everyone is willing to see that reflection. The archetype of the fed-up empath is also deeply connected to the collective unconscious of our time. We live in an age of profound disconnection where people numb themselves with distractions, where genuine emotion is often suppressed or commodified. The empath, by their very nature, feels this collective wound, and when they awaken, when they refuse to participate in the game of superficiality, they become agents of change. Their boundaries and their authenticity send ripples through the collective psyche, challenging the very structures that perpetuate emotional suppression. They are not content to remain silent while the world pretends. They speak, and their voice carries the weight of every truth they have swallowed for years. Have you felt this awakening within yourself? Perhaps you have noticed a quiet anger rising, not anger in the sense of hatred, but anger as a sacred fire that says, I deserve to exist as I am. This anger is not something to be feared. It is a sign that your soul is demanding balance. It is the fire that burns away illusions, the energy that clears the path for your authentic self to emerge. Too often, empaths are taught to fear their anger, to bury it under layers of forgiveness and understanding. But anger, when integrated, is not destructive. It is transformative. It is the voice of the self saying, this is not right. This must change. In myth and symbol, this transformation is often represented by the warrior archetype. The empath ose passive, becomes the warrior not in the sense of violence, but in the sense of fierce protection of their own soul. They become a guardian of their own light. And this is the point at which their empathy becomes its most powerful form, for when you are no longer drained by others, when you are rooted in your own strength, your capacity to love and to heal expands beyond anything you knew before. You are no longer helping out of compulsion or guilt. You are helping from a place of overflow, of conscious choice. This is why the fed-up empath is the most dangerous archetype of all, not because they harm, but because they heal in ways that force others to confront themselves. They do not enable, they do not soothe the ego's false narratives. They demand authenticity, and they live it so fully that it cannot be ignored. They are like a flame in the dark, not asking for permission to shine, but burning with the truth of who they are. And this light, once ignited, cannot be extinguished. The empath who has crossed this threshold is no longer concerned with being liked or approved of. They know that the path of authenticity is often lonely, but it is worth it. They know that the world may misunderstand their boundaries, but they no longer live for the world's approval. They live for their own alignment with the self, the inner, eternal center, that is both deeply personal and universally connected. This alignment is what gives them a quiet, unshakable power. They no longer seek validation outside themselves because they have found it within, and this is where the real work begins. For once the empath has awakened, they are called to integrate their power with their gift. They must learn how to use their empathy consciously, not as a reflex, but as a tool. They must learn when to open their heart and when to shield it. They must learn to feel without absorbing, to listen without losing themselves. This is not an easy task, but it is the path to mastery. And in walking this path, the empath becomes not just a healer of others, but a living embodiment of wholeness. The final stage of the empath's transformation is not marked by a grand declaration, but by a quiet, steady presence that radiates from deep within. They no longer need to explain their boundaries or justify their choices, because their energy speaks for them. There is a new weight to their silence, a grounded confidence that cannot be shaken. They have walked through the underworld of their own psyche, faced their shadow, and emerged not as who they were, but as who they truly are. This authenticity is magnetic, and yet it is also unsettling to those who have not done their own inner work. For the empath who is fed up and awakened no longer serves as a container for other people's projections. They reflect those projections back, forcing others to confront what they have been avoiding. This is the true danger of the awakened empaths. They are not simply compassionate. They are catalysts. They bring change wherever they go, because they cannot tolerate falseness. They are not interested in playing roles or keeping peace at the cost of their soul. They will disrupt the comfortable patterns of those around them, not out of malice, but out of a deep instinctual drive for truth. And this drive is not personal, it is archetypal. It is the same energy that drives the hero to slay the dragon. The same energy that calls the mystic to wander into the desert. The same energy that compels the wounded healer to finally tend to their own wounds. But this path is not without challenges. The empath who awakens must also learn to handle their newfound power with care, For years, they were defined by giving too much, by allowing themselves to be consumed. Now, as they reclaim their voice, there can be a temptation to swing to the opposite extreme, to become rigid, to build walls so high that no one can enter. The real mastery lies in balance, to remain open-hearted yet discerning, compassionate yet firm. This is the dance of the mature empath, the one who has integrated both their light and their shadow. In many ways, this integration is the essence of Jung's work. I have always believed that the goal of life is not perfection, but wholeness. And wholeness comes only when we embrace every part of ourselves, the parts we are proud of and the parts we would rather hide. For the empath, this means not only embracing their gift for feeling, but also their anger, their desire for boundaries, their need to protect themselves. These aspects are not flaws. They are essential pieces of the psyche's puzzle. When the empath denies these pieces, they remain fragmented and vulnerable. But when they accept them, they become whole, and wholeness is power. There is also a profound spiritual dimension to this wholeness. The empath who has awakened often feels a deeper connection to something beyond themselves, call it the self, the soul, the divine. They begin to see that their gift was never meant to be a burden. It was meant to be a bridge, a way to connect the human heart to the deeper truths of existence. And now that they have freed themselves from the chains of unconscious giving, they can use this gift consciously, intentionally. They become like a vessel filled not with the pain of the world, but with the wisdom to discern what truly needs their attention and what does not. In this state, the empath no longer feels the compulsion to fix everyone. They understand that every soul has its own path, its own lessons, its own timing. They no longer confuse love with rescuing. Instead, they offer their presence as a mirror, reflecting back the truth without judgment. This is a radical act in a world that thrives on avoidance and denial. It is why the awakened empath is both revered and feared, because they see too much and they are no longer willing to stay silent about it. I have seen this transformation many times, and it is always accompanied by a certain fire in the eyes, a quiet determination that was not there before. It is the fire of someone who has died to their old self and been reborn. It is the fire of someone who has realized that their empathy is not a curse but a sacred tool. And like all sacred tools, it must be wielded with both strength and wisdom. This fire cannot be extinguished by the opinions of others. It cannot be diminished by rejection or misunderstanding. It burns from the inside out, fueled by the soul's alignment with its own truth. Perhaps you have felt this fire stirring within you. Perhaps you have noticed that the things you once tolerated now feel unbearable. This is not you becoming bitter. It is you awakening. It is the soul refusing to live in false harmony any longer. It is the moment when you begin to see that the most dangerous thing you can do for the world, for those who benefit from your silence, is to become fully yourself. This selfhood is not arrogant or cold. It is rooted in love, but a love that is fierce and uncompromising, a love that says, I will not abandon myself for you. I will not betray my soul to keep you comfortable. This is where the empath's true power lies. not in their ability to feel everyone's pain, but in their ability to feel their own soul so clearly that nothing can pull them away from it. They become a force of nature, calm, steady, unyielding. They do not need to fight or prove themselves, because their very being is proof of what it means to live authentically. And in a world filled with masks and roles, such authenticity is the most dangerous thing of all. This danger is not something to fear, but something to honor, for the world desperately needs empaths who are awake, who are no longer drained by the unconscious demands of others. We need empaths who can stand in their power, who can speak truth without apology, who can love without losing themselves. These are the people who will change the world, not by force but by presence. Their very existence challenges the old ways of relating, ways rooted in exploitation, control and fear, and replaces them with something new, something real. If you are an empath, perhaps this is your calling. Perhaps you are being asked to stop carrying what was never yours. Perhaps you are being invited to let the fire of your own soul burn away the illusions that have kept you small. This process will not be easy. It will require you to face your own shadow, to feel the anger and grief you have buried, to let go of the roles that once defined you. But on the other side of this process is freedom, the kind of freedom that cannot be given by the world because it is born within you. You will know you have reached this freedom when your empathy no longer feels like a weight but like a flame that warms rather than burns, that illuminates rather than consumes. You will know it when you can say no without guilt, when you can love without losing yourself, when you can stand alone and feel whole. In that moment, you will understand why a fed-up empath is the most dangerous archetype of all. It is not because they seek to destroy, but because they cannot be destroyed. They have walked through the fire and found themselves on the other side, unshaken, unbroken, and more alive than ever. This, I believe, is the true destiny of the empath, not to remain a silent vessel of other suffering, but to become a living embodiment of what it means to integrate shadow and light, to love fiercely without self-betrayal, to live as a beacon of authenticity in a world of illusions. This is not a path for the faint of heart, but it is a path of immense beauty. For in choosing this path, you do not just free yourself, you light the way for others. And that is the kind of danger the world needs. So, I say to you, if you feel the stirrings of this archetype within you, do not be afraid. Trust the process. Trust the fire that burns within, for it is not here to destroy you, it is here to set you free. And when you are free, when you are fully alive in your own truth, there is nothing more powerful, nothing more necessary, nothing more unstoppable.